our schedule just is straight through till the 14th of May, God willing, and there are no interruptions. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about last time. I'm going to erase this board. Use it. Last time we covered the historical feast that involved apparition. Going back several weeks, we looked at the 12 apparitions in the history of the church that are officially approved not only by the local bishop, which would be ecclesiastical approbation, but also by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which used to be known as the Holy Office. And there's only 12 of them, and we looked at those. But there are so many other apparitions reported in the history of Christianity, and some of these were given feast days, and that have been in the Roman calendar of the church. And so we looked at them as well, and we talked about Our Lady of the Pillar in Spain, and the earliest one in 40 AD. This would have been before the death of Our Lady, before the Assumption. At least that's what tradition holds. And it appeared in Zaragoza, Spain, and Our Lady appeared to St. James the Greater. That's the son of Zebedee, who tradition holds traveled as far as Santiago de Compostela, and he appeared to her. And she's on a pillar, and therefore, and a church was built, and that's why she's known as Nuestra Señora del Pilar, and where we get the woman's name Pilar, because any woman named after Our Mary, Our Lady of the Pillar, for short, she was known as Pilar. And then Our Lady of the Snows. In the 4th century, during the reign of a pope called Liberius, there was an elderly couple who had no children and was asking God, what shall we do with our wealth? And then in the middle of August, it snowed on one of the 7 hills of Rome, the Esquiline Hill, and the Pope went out to see it. And there are paintings of this, and the money was used to build Our Lady of the Snows. Was there? Yes. And that was there's been several churches on that site, and that is the site of the earliest basilica in Rome, Our Lady of, dedicated to Our Lady, and it's known as St. Mary Major. You all have heard of the basilica. It's one of the 4 main basilicas. But the foundation story of that is Our Lady of the Snows in the middle of August. And then we talked about Our Lady of Walsingham in England, which happens in the 11th century. A devout Englishwoman gets a vision of Our Lady where she asks her, she gets a vision not only of Our Lady, but of the home in Nazareth where the Holy Family lived. And she asks her to build a replica of that, and she does. And then after her death, her son, and it becomes builds a chapel, a shrine around it, and then it becomes a place of pilgrimage for English Catholics for centuries. And the last mile before you arrive at the shrine and the replica of the Holy House is known as the Chapel of the Slipper, because the last mile everyone took their shoes off. But during the reign of Henry VIII, the basilica was destroyed, and now, but then afterwards it was rebuilt, and so the Anglicans have celebrate Our Lady of Walsingham at the rebuilt shrine, but the Catholic Church owns the Slipper Chapel. So there are 2 places of devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham, which centers around the Annunciation and the Holy House. And the legend is that the Annunciation happened in the house in Nazareth where Jesus grew up. Then we talked about Our Lady of the Rosary and the incredible story of the Battle of Lepanto between a coalition of, it was a naval battle in the Gulf of Corinth, and it was a battle between the Turkish fleet of the Ottoman Empire out of Constantinople, which was Islamic, and had taken over, that ruled the Eastern Mediterranean and had taken over many areas, including Palestine, and the Pope Pius V had sent out an alarm to all the Christian princes in Spain, in the Papal States, in France, in Venice, in Genoa. These were city-states in those days. And they had put together a fleet called the Holy League. And they fought this battle. But prior to that, Pope Pius V had asked everyone to say the Rosary. The Rosary at that time was a devotion that was not worldwide, but I put down the date of 1280 because Our Lady appeared to St. Dominic then and asked him to pray the Rosary. And then the Battle of Lepanto takes place, I gotta get it right, yes, 1571. And so it was because of our Pope Pius V asked all of Christian Europe to pray the Rosary. And then the battle happens, and of course the smaller fleet, the Holy League, beats the Islamic fleet, Turkish Ottoman Empire fleet, and but there is an apparition. One of the questions that came up last week was there any vision? And I had left this out of the story of the Battle of Lepanto. After the Pope sent forth these fleets, and there's also a connection to Our Lady of Guadalupe, thanks to Rick, and I'll tell you that too. These are addenda. Our Lady appeared to Juan Diego at Guadalupe in 1534, I think it is, right? And she leaves her imprint on his cloak, or his tilde, which was in the hands of the Archbishop of Mexico. When he got word that the Pope was sending the Holy League to stop the advance of the Islamic fleets in the control of the Mediterranean, which they were threatening Italy, and they were threatening Spain via North Africa and going west. So Christian Europe was at the brink. When he heard about it, he had a copy made of the tilde of Juan Diego, Our Lady of Guadalupe. He touched it to the original, and he had someone by boat take it to the Pope. Whereupon the Pope contacted Philip the Spain. He sent it to Philip II of Spain, who was the major contributor to the Battle of Lepanto through his ships, and also his half-brother, Don Juan of Austria, his half-brother and the illegitimate son of Charles I. And he said, and Philip V gave it to a famous admiral from Genoa named Andrea Doria. Some of you may remember a ship that went down called the Andrea Doria. That ship is named after a very famous general who was one of the victors in the Battle of Lepanto. And so he gives, Philip II sends it to the Pope, who gives it to this admiral from the city-state of Genoa and says, you must attach this to your ship and have it flying when you go into battle. Now, no one knew in the West about Our Lady of Guadalupe. It was just a very few years after, maybe 40 years later. So they're told there's an Aztec Indian who Our Lady appeared to her, and here's the image, and you have to put this on your ship. And Andrea Doria puts this on his ship when they fly in, and all the sailors were given rosaries and of course they win. Here's the apparition. On the day of the battle, October 7th in 1571, there's no telephone, there's no email. Pius V is in his office meeting with his treasurer. And all of a sudden he says to the treasurer, this is not the moment to be engaged in worldly affairs. And he stands up and he looks intently at the sky and he says, we must make haste to thank our Lord and Our Lady. The battle is won. And it was the very day and the time that the battle was won. He finds out weeks later, and that's the vision. So that he declared the feast day on October 7th of Our Lady of victory, and 2 years later he's dead, and there's a new Pope, Gregory the 13th, and he changes the name Our Lady of the Holy Rosary, and that's why we have churches all over the world known as Our Lady of the Holy Rosary. So there was, in 1571, on the day of the victory, there's a vision. And then we talked about Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which goes back to the mid-13th century, the 1200s. And we told a little bit about the history of the Carmelites going back to the time of the Crusades. And ultimately, when the Holy Land is lost to the Muslims, the Carmelites moved to Europe, and some went to England. And St. Simon Stock was an English Carmelite abbot, and Our Lady appeared to him, and so that's why we have Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And she gives him the brown scapular that some people wear. My grandchildren, 2 of them, wear a scapular. We stopped, that's where we stopped last time. But secondly, there was a question about St. Louis de Montfort, the great 19th century French priest in the west of France, who taught so beautifully about the power of Our Lady as mediator. And so I did more research on that, and he has absolutely beautiful writings on Our Lady and how important it is to fix ourselves on the world to come, not to waste a moment of this life on our own pleasures or our own earthly pursuits or just comforts, because this world is a test and for the next one. So we need to live both in time and in eternity. It's very beautiful when you read, and those of you who have done the 33 days for morning glory know this. But I read as much as I could, and I cannot find any vision that St. Louis de Montfort had. So today, we have what we didn't do of the historical feasts. We didn't talk about Our Lady of Czestochowa, patroness of Poland, and Our Lady of Akita, Spain, which is a very powerful apparition. This is not an apparition. There's no apparition. But since John Paul II, St. John Paul II, was very devoted to Our Lady of Czestochowa and made many pilgrimages there, I think it bears mentioning. And Our Lady of Akita, welcome. Our Lady of Akita, we'll finish with that. That is a very powerful apparition that that has local ecclesiastical approbation, but not yet Vatican approbation by the Congregation from the Doctrine of the Faith, and I'll give you the backstory on that. But it also, people have asked me also, whoops, it's not there. There are a couple more that people have asked about. Our Lady of Loreto, the Loreto sisters. Mother Teresa was first professed as a sister of Loreto before she founded the Missionaries of Charity. Our Lady, and it's very similar to Our Lady of the Pillar in Zaragoza, Spain. Very similar. There's we had a request to talk about Our Lady of Good Help, which is the only apparition approved by a local bishop in the United States of Mary, and Our Lady of LaVang, Vietnam, which is the only apparition in Vietnam. And then we'll get to. So I don't have a chart for these because I'm adding them, so I'll put them up here.
Marianne?
Yes.
What about Our Lady of Cabello? That's in Rwanda.
I don't know anything about those, and I'm not a Marian authority by any shape. What I have found as I do the research for this, and I highly recommend it if anybody has the time for this, it is stunning to see how many private revelations there have been. There are 295 that have been studied by the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith and the Marianum Institute in Rome. But there are many more than that. We could stay here forever if I tried to hit all of the Marian apparitions. Also, I should mention before we go on, something very curious, very interesting by St. Louis de Montfort, which I really trust his writing. The more I read of him, it's just gorgeous. Everything he says rings true in my heart, and it rings true in in the Bible. And one of the things he says is that the prince of this world, the father of lies, also known as Satan and the devil, is very clever and is a mystery. The Catechism says, and that he too can cause false apparitions. So that is why the church is so careful about approbation. There's two. First is the approbation of the local ecclesiastical authority, the bishop, and then there's the approbation of the Vatican. So the church is very careful, and I have to be very careful. If I speak under the magisterium, I have to tell you all of this. There's no way for me to know which is which. Some of them have stood the test of time, and they are feasts in the Roman Missal, and they have local approbation. So I'm on firm ground if I speak about any of them, but there are so many I can't even get to them all. It would be the rest of my life. There really are a lot.
Are there?
Yes.
I'm sorry. What did you say about 33 days to morning glory?
There is a program, and I don't. Has anyone done it in this room? 33. Amory's done it, and so they can speak more. It's a beautiful program that was written recently. It's a book. Who's the author?
Michael Gately, I heard him last year, he is wonderful.
I haven't done it,
Speaker.
but it's based principally on the writings. There's 3 books that St. Louis de Montfort published, and based on that and what else?
It's different saints. I think had Mary focus in their lives, and then read those chapters. And I don't know.
Gately's book has words of with 4 or 5 different people, like Mother Teresa, Pope John Paul II, who Maximilian Kolbe, who had strong devotion to Our Lady. And Gately's book has their words. It's a lot easier to read than to read Louis de Montfort, because the way he writes, his verbiage
Yes.
is difficult to grasp. It's a lot easier to read the words of Mother Teresa.
So is it correct for me to say that the book includes the quotations from modern saints speaking of what they understand as devotion to Mary?
Right, exactly.
And is it correct for me to say that the end of the 33 days to morning glory devoted to Mary, one consecrates oneself to Mary, which is what she asked for in one of the apparitions. Is it Fatima? Is it Fatima where she asked for consecration to the Immaculate Heart? Not sure.
No, I think Fatima, she asked for praying to the rose for Jesus, right? For her son. Like, wasn't that Fatima asked? Yeah.
Fatima has many messages.
Right.
We did cover that. There's a video earlier that covers everything she did at Fatima.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to continue on.
Quick question.
Yes?
So who said that there are many fake apparitions? Who was the person who said that?
St. Louis de Montfort. I'll write that. He is a French saint. Montfort. Montfort.
He was actually a Celtic. Okay.
He was a
Celt.
Celt?
Yes, okay, Irish, okay. There was a part of France, okay, which had a
Brittany?
large
Yes.
Celtic population.
That's right.
Okay. And, from his Celtic heritage, he was a strong evangelist. And so he evangelized, the rosary. He went out, spoke about the rosary, promoted it, and that's, his contribution really.
Right. So what I want to put up now is these additional ones that have been asked for, that are widely known in the Catholic Church. Some of them are early and some of them not so early. So we have. Right, so we have 1382. We have Our Lady of Czestochowa. Poland. And then we have Our Lady of Loreto in Italy, and I'll get the date in a minute. And then we have Our Lady of Good Help in Wisconsin. Oh, I got that. No, I think that one is out of order. I'm going to move that one down. Our Lady of LaVang in Vietnam. Vietnam. Our Lady of Good Help. And that is in Wisconsin. And we have a separate sheet. Just move on to red. It dates back to 1294. This one actually goes back to 1294. So I would put this one up. We'll do that one first, okay? And Our Lady of Good Help is 1859. And Our Lady of LaVang, Czestochowa, Loreto, 1798. There we go. Okay. So to start with Our Lady of Czestochowa, these stories have so many dates to them, I need my notes, is not an apparition, but she is the patron saint and queen of Poland, and as I said before, St. John Paul II was devoted to her. And what is there? There's an icon of Mary, and I'll pass it around, that is displayed in a beautiful chapel at a huge monastery in Czestochowa, Poland. And I've been there and I've seen the icon. And Our Lady in this, it's a typical icon such as have been made over the centuries in all of Eastern Christianity, right? The face of the mother and with the draped veil with the borders and a lot of gold. And so you see Mary, and you'll notice as I pass it around, she's got 2 slashes coming down her cheek. And the child Jesus is on her left arm. With her right arm, she's gesturing towards Jesus. And with his right arm, he's blessing. And in his left hand, he's got a copy of the Gospels. And there's quite a story behind this. So I'll pass this around. So here, now some of this cannot be documented, the earliest part of this. So it's what we call the Lucan tradition, or a legend. The Lucan tradition is that St. Luke, who would have known Our Lady because he has the longest narratives in the Gospels on Our Lady, the Annunciation, the Visitation, all of that. And the theory is that he spent time with Mary, or else we have no other source for what he knows about Mary. He knows much more of the infancy narratives than Matthew does, but Matthew also has an infancy narrative. And so here is the story is that St. Luke took a tabletop from the house in Nazareth that was made out of cypress wood, and that he painted Our Lady and Jesus. And that this tabletop painting was found in Jerusalem by the mother of the Emperor Constantine when she made her pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and where she identified all of the holy places and had chapels built there in the 300s, in the 4th century. That she took this tabletop with the painting of Mary and Jesus and brought it back and presented it to her son, the Emperor Constantine, in Constantinople, right? And that it stayed there, and no one knows how long. And ultimately, it traveled from Constantinople to a location in Hungary called Belz, B-E-L-Z. And then in Belz, there was a Hungarian nobleman named Vladislav Opolzik, the Duke of Opol. Opolzik, meaning I think in Hungarian of Opol. And who was he? He was an advisor to the King of Poland and Hungary. At this point, this is very early, like 1200s. Poland and Hungary were one kingdom. And he was advisor to the king, and the king himself was an heir to, on one side of his family, to the Duke of Anjou in France. And it's why if you look at this icon, she has, well, nowadays she has a metal frontispiece where you only see her face, Jesus' face, and the two hands to protect it. And when I tell you the story, you'll know why the monks at Jasna Monastery decided they had to protect the painting. So when you see it, it's a metal covering that's very beautifully painted with holes for the two faces and the two hands. And so they changed the different frontispieces, and many of them have the fleur-de-lis pattern on Our Lady's robe, because going way back in the story, this king was a partial heir to the Duke of Anjou, and you may know that in the history of France, the royal families, the fleur-de-lis, the flower of the lily, was the emblem of the royal family of France. So she resides in Poland, but she has the fleur-de-lis, depending on which frontispiece. It's like changing the dress on a statue. She's wearing that day, and it does get changed. She has the fleur-de-lis. So this duke, who was advisor to the half-French king of Poland and Hungary, Vladislav, took it on a trip, and he was traveling through Poland. And as he was passing Czestochowa, he passed the monastery of Jasna, which had been founded a few years earlier and was the home of the Paulist Fathers, which were a Hermetic order of priests and brothers, and his horse would go no further. And he was advised in a dream that he should lead the icon of Mary and Jesus from the Holy Land at Jasna Monastery. So he does. So the Paulist Fathers came into possession in 1384, almost the 15th century, of this icon from Nazareth. And now if you fast forward about 300 years, we have the Protestant Reformation, or Reformations in Europe. After that, that was followed, that's in the 1500s. For 100 years there were wars all over Europe as the different princes lined up either with John Calvin or Zwingli in Switzerland, or Henry VIII in England, and or Luther, right? And they fought wars, and because each country, you followed, there was no separation of church and state, and you followed the religion of your monarch, right? So, and one of the wars, there are many, was known as the Great Northern War. There were actually two Great Northern Wars. And that the king of Sweden had originally been the king of Denmark, Christian II, and he had converted to the Lutheran faith, and he brought his armies to conquer more land for what he considered the true faith, right? And he came into Poland with his armies, and they attempted to capture the monastery at Jasna with the famous icon, and in the winter. And 70 monks and 180 local volunteers held off 4,000 Swedish soldiers for 40 days. And they saved the holy icon, and they turned the course of the war. The Swedish armies withdrew from that part of Poland. And so then the king of Poland, who was King John II Casimir Vasa, came to Czestochowa after this battle and put a crown on the image. And he declared her queen protector of Poland in the Cathedral of Lvov in 1656. So 1 year later, he declares her. But that was the king of Poland. Now, earlier, and I should have told you this story earlier, like just before the Reformation, this icon got the slashes in the face. And that is because there was a man in Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Moravia, a different kingdom that used to exist called Moravia. There was a Bible scholar named Jan Hus, Jan Hus, I can't remember if he was originally a Catholic priest, but he taught at Charles University in Prague. And he had followed the writings of an English Bible scholar named John Wycliffe from a few years earlier, and he too was a great Bible scholar. And what they held in common was they felt the church should not hold Scripture only in Latin. Up until that point, the Catholic Church only allowed Scripture to be copied and published in the various cities of Europe in the Latin language, and only priests were educated enough to know enough Latin, and the gospel was preached in Latin. Can you imagine? So the common people attended Mass that did not understand, at least, but there was, the Gospels were not read in the vernacular, the local language. John Wycliffe in English, and then later Jan Hus in Hungary said this is all wrong, and they began their own translations in the local languages, in English, and for Jan Hus, Hungarian, I guess, or Czech language, I'm not sure. And they were called, I can't remember what happened to Wycliffe, but Hus was eventually called to a council, and he was scared to go because he thought he would be killed as a heretic. This was great heresy at this point, to do what he was doing. He was doing it without ecclesiastical permission. And I think it's the Council of Florence, and you've heard of good King Wenceslaus? He said, I will protect you. I will give you safe passage. Go to the council, and I will protect you, and answer their questions. So he does. And sadly, he was kidnapped and put in prison and eventually executed by local authorities, but with the permission of the church. So he became a great saint for the Hussites, who became a Protestant, one of many Protestant denominations. And now, so the Hussites in 1430 knew about this icon, and the Hussites also believe you should have no icons. You should have no graven images from the Bible, just like many Protestant denominations to this day. If you go into their church, there are no statues because it says, thou shalt not have graven images in the Ten Commandments. Now that's why the Catholic Church has icons and says that's not a good interpretation of the Old Testament is another whole class. But this was a literal interpretation of a historical period that's long past. No one is worshiping statues. At any rate, so the Hussites stormed the monastery, plundering the sanctuary, and they stole the icon. And they put it in a wagon. And the Hussites tried to get away, but once again, the horses refused to move. So the Hussite plunderers took the icon and threw it on the ground so they could make their getaway. And one of the plunderers took his sword and slashed it twice. When he tried to slash it the third time, and it's now on the ground, the legend is that he fell to the ground and was in great pain and stayed there until he died. Whereupon the monks, the plunderers escaped with their wagon, and the monks got it back, and then they have tried many times to repair the icon, but it's never, the slashes still show up, which is something in itself. Is that divine intervention? We don't know, but they haven't been able to eradicate the slashes. So that is that is the story of Our Lady of Czestochowa, and miracles have happened there. It's a huge pilgrimage place. There are many chapels at the monastery. There's a main one, which is the size of a basilica, and off to the side, on a separate courtyard, is the chapel of the holy icon. And these Paulist fathers take you around and talk to you, and we went to mass there, and it was very moving to see young people. What I saw in Poland at this pilgrimage site were many, many very young people in seminary. The place was filled with priests, young priests and seminarians, all coming on pilgrimage. It was very, very inspiring. Lots of people praying all day long on their knees on a stone floor before this icon. It was really, I can see why John Paul II was very moved and made many pilgrimages to Our Lady of Czestochowa.
Can I ask you just
Sure.
one question, because I didn't make the connection back to St. Luke. So is this the image that he painted?
We can't
On-
verify
on the
that.
tabletop,
In the Jasnagora monastery, the Paulist fathers have written documents going back, I'll tell you how far. They have written documents, they say, that trace the progress of this icon from Jerusalem to Constantinople to Belz to Jasnagora, Czestochowa, and I did not write the date, but they believe they have written documents going back 600 years, so that would be the 1300s, which is right about the time that they took over. There was a parish church there, and then the Paulist fathers took over that parish, and then they built their monastery around it. And then they came, very shortly after they arrived, they came into possession in the 1300s. They have documents about that. So the rest we have to call tradition. It's known as an oral tradition that is handed down as to the provenance of that icon.
So has anybody ever tried to do any of the spectrography, I think, or
Yes.
on it?
Yes, and that would take, I did read that, but I do want to get to these. Let me just tell you
okay.
very briefly. They have done, there are scientific tests that you can do on paintings, so you can see the layers. And it appears that at some point it was damaged and someone painted over it with paintings of one particular century, but what they didn't, but it peeled off because the original paint had some wax mixed into it. And so that peeled off, so then they did more, one theory is that they cleared the whole boards altogether and repainted her. This is long before the Hussites came and damaged the icon. So if you Google Our Lady of the Holy Icon, Czestochowa, paint, I think, you will get all of that. But yes, that has been, so they feel that she was given, in the repainting, she was given a much more aquiline nose. And you could see that in the painting. But there's a lot to this story. We could write, I'm sure there's books on this. Okay, any other questions about Our Lady of Czestochowa and Jasnagora Monastery? Okay, so then next we have Our Lady of Loreto. The story of Our Lady of Loreto is very similar to the story of Our Lady of Walsingham, which comes from about the same, well, Our Lady of Walsingham's a little earlier. What do they have in common? They have the idea that they both involved a vision where Our Lady told someone to get her house, and in Walsingham it was build a recreation. In Our Lady of Loreto, Italy, it was the actual house is thought to have been flown with 4 angels through the air and brought to Loreto. Have any of you heard this story?
Yes.
This is legend. This is tradition. Our Lady of Loreto also is very similar to Our Lady of the Pillar, because if you remember the story of Our Lady of the Pillar in 40 AD, the idea was that there was a statue of Our Lady, and it's still there in Saragossa, Spain, in the Basilica, that was placed on a pillar, and the pillar came through the air. So we have an aerial translation. This is a different word of use of the word translation, but in church parlance, in theology, a translation is whenever relics of a saint, like their bones, are dug up and moved. It's called a translation, right? And also if an icon is moved, or a holy house. So, it shares something with Our Lady of the Pillar in that it is said to have traveled through the air, and it shares something with Our Lady of Walsingham in that it's is said to be the holy house where the Holy Family lived in, where the Annunciation happened, and where the Holy Family lived in Nazareth. And the legend is that, now this is tricky. The legend is that it was flown by angelic beings from Jerusalem in the 1200s. Why so late? This is later than Our Lady of Walsingham, because the Christian armies held the Holy Land after the Crusades for 100 years. There was a Catholic kingdom. Did you know that? And they lost it bit by bit. And by the 1200s, they had nothing left but there was a fortress on the Mediterranean near Caesarea, and they wanted the idea is that this holy house, the actual house, not a reproduction, needed to be protected, but else it would have been destroyed by the Saracens coming in and destroying all of the Christian pilgrimage sites. And where did it go? First it went from Jerusalem to Tersato in Croatia, right? It was only there a short time when it was flown to Recanati in Italy on the coast in 1294. So first it was flown in 1291 to Croatia. From Croatia to Italy, Recanati, in 1293 years later. And then 1 year later, it was flown from Recanati on the coast to Loreto, which is an inland city, in 1295. And let's see, almost 250 years later, Pope Sixtus V ordered that a basilica be built over this to preserve this little house, this little stone house. And so the basilica contains the holy house. You can go and see it. And in the holy house is a small black image of the Virgin and Child. You've heard of the Black Madonnas, right? And I always wondered, why would someone venerate a Black Madonna? What I didn't understand is that these statues were venerated for so many centuries. Without electricity, there were always candles in front of it. And it's the carbon from the candles that make the Black Madonnas, and there are lots of them. There's one in Spain, and Our Lady of Czestochowa, she's known as a Black Madonna too, because that paint has darkened. So there is a small black image of the Virgin and Child inside of this house, and then the basilica, and around that is kind of a protective curtain with beautiful paintings on it from scenes from the life of Mary in the Bible. And then around that is the basilica. And the documented history can only be traced back as far as the Crusades, about the 14th century. That's where people began writing about this event. It's been a pilgrimage place since the 13th century, so that's the 1200s. And they claim, yes, and that it was the house of the Holy Family lived in while in Judea. I've heard two different legends, that it was in Judea, which is southern Israel, or that it was in Nazareth, which is in Galilee. But there was never an apparition at Loreto. There was a woman named Mary Ward, an English woman, who came to Loreto in 1609. So this is like 200 years after the Pope ordered the basilica. And she was very, very devoted to Our Lady of Loreto, and she had visions. And there were cures happened there. So as soon as cures happened, the pilgrimages happened. And she went back to England in 1609, and she founded the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That is the official name of the Sisters of Loreto, who are known because of Mother Teresa. And I thought to myself, 1609, that's the reign of Elizabeth I. Now, she did moderate the persecution of Catholics when she became, but priests were never allowed to work or say Mass in England during these years, or in Ireland. The Catholic Church was suppressed. So I did a little bit more research, and it was very interesting. This woman came back to England, and she wore street dress, and she founded a house for the poor to take care of indigent people. And so the government said, all right, you're a religious sister, but as long as you're doing social outwork, you can operate. So nuns doing social service were allowed to operate, but they couldn't. The priests would be executed up until, for a long time in England, many more. A law was passed in the late 1800s that you could be a priest in England. That's how long the suppression of the Catholic Church. But so these Sisters of Loreto were operating under the radar, which is quite sweet, right? Yes, and so there were apparitions, there have been apparitions in the sanctuary of this basilica. Any questions about Our Lady of Loreto?
Is there anything left in Croatia? If it was there for 3 years, was there anything?
That I don't know. Or in
Or the other place?
the other place, what's it called? Tersato, Italy. No, Tersato's in Croatia, in Recanati in Italy. And that takes us to Our Lady of LaVang. I gotta watch the time. Yeah. Have any of you heard of Our Lady of LaVang? I had either. Somebody asked me, one of you, was it you, Kathleen? Somebody said to me, do you know? Somebody told me about Our Lady of LaVang.
I think it was the lady from Haiti, I think. Where's she from? What is the name of the lady?
Oh, she's right here.
Yeah, wasn't-
Rose Lees.
Yeah, wasn't she?
I don't know anything about
No? I thought you. You know a lot of French.
Oh, here it is. I was looking for my notes. So Our Lady of LaVang is 1798. At that point, it turns out, I learned, that Vietnam had emperors. And there was an emperor who restricted the practice of Catholicism in Vietnam. And then as that happened, it became more and more strict, and he began to persecute all Catholics. And so the Catholics took refuge in a rainforest, in the jungle, and that is known as LaVang. And many, many Catholics all went there rather than be killed. And as they lived in this jungle, they became ill. And but they used to gather together under a tree in the jungle, in LaVang, and they would pray the rosary. And one night, Our Lady appeared in the branches of that tree. And she was wearing the traditional women's clothing of the Vietnamese. And she was holding a child, and she had 2 angels on either side of her. And she told them to take the leaves from the trees there in the jungle and boil them as medicine for all the people who were ill. And they did, and the people got better. And then in 1802, so that is 4 years later, the Christians returned to their villages, and in 1820, a chapel was built. But in 1830, there was a new wave of persecutions of Christians, and so the chapel was destroyed. And then in 1886, a new chapel was built. And now, if you remember the Vietnamese War now, right? The Southern was South Vietnam was very Christian. This parish, I'm proud to say, St. Thomas More, sponsored a Vietnamese family who lived with us, the Pham family, and we found that a committee was organized, and we found an apartment for them on the Post Road, and I was involved. And this was a very, very Catholic Christian family. And the figurines that we had up until recently in our nativity set, after we found them jobs and we got the boys, there were a father, 2 sons, and a nephew. After they were established and they were earning money, they bought the figures as a thank you gift to the parish. And, but I've been looking closely at the figurines and they're not the same ones, so I don't know what, but they were there. And we did that in 1975. So the fall of Saigon was right around 1975. But South Vietnam was very Christian. So in 1961, a basilica was built, and or a minor basilica, and it was declared the National Marian Center of Vietnam. But then, as we all know, the South lost the war, and communism took over. And but in 1998, John Paul II expressed a wish that that basilica be enlarged and rebuilt. I don't know what has happened to it under the communist regime. I know things are much more open in Vietnam today than they were right after the communists took over. So that is the story of Our Lady of LaVang. So since many Vietnamese Christians left Vietnam and they've gone all over the world, and many of them are here in the United States because we took anybody who wanted to come. And so I looked it up, and there are churches named Our Lady of LaVang in the Philippines and all over the United States where there's a Vietnamese community. There's a church to Our Lady of LaVang. Have any of you seen Our Lady of LaVang churches? Well, they are. I was surprised. Any questions about Our Lady of LaVang? I love her. I love that she wore the traditional costume, and then she tells them how to cure the sick. I mean, how beautiful is that, you know? There was no stern message. They were terribly suffering. People were dying in the jungle, right? And she comes and rescues them. That takes us to the last one we have of the historical apparitions. Oh no, I didn't talk about Our Lady of Good Help. Nope. Our Lady of Good Help is 1859. There were, if you visit the Green Bay, Wisconsin area where my brother lived for many years, there's a huge Belgian population. There were many immigrants from Belgium, and it's very Catholic, and there are Catholic churches, and I've been in them, that were all founded by the Belgian community. And in the diocese of Champion, Wisconsin is in the diocese of Green Bay. And in first I'll tell you about the apparition. So there was a young Belgian woman who was born in Belgium but brought here by her parents, named Adele Brise. And I love this, B-R-I-S-E, because in French, there are many words in French for wind, and one of them we get B-R-E-E-Z-E, breeze, but it comes from French. It's a loan word from French, and it's a gentle wind, right? And her name is Adele Brise. Oh, you know, La Brise, yeah, right. Yeah, we don't, well, I guess we have, in English, we have many words for wind, probably. I was struck that French had so many words for wind. Adele Brise, Our Lady appeared to her. You know what? I didn't write down the whole story, or I've forgotten it. I've read so many of these. I'll have to come back with exactly what happened. Oh yes, now I do remember. She appears to her 3 times. I'm looking in my notes for where I wrote this all down. Oh yes.
Yeah, what's with was it her sister?
Yes.
Okay. And she saw a lady, she was, dressed in white, I guess, and
With a yellow sash.
Yellow sash and a crown,
Mm-hmm.
and she had blonde hair
Yes.
also.
And no veil. She's got flowing hair. Right. I found my notes here. So the 3 visions, and what I can recollect, Rick, is that the sister didn't see but what she did see, and she appears between a pine tree and a maple tree, and she sees a blaze of light, very much like Our Lady of Bano, if you remember that one. And she goes to her local priest, and it sounds like the local priest was very wise, because in all these apparition stories, the local priest always doesn't believe, right? And he's supposed to think critically, based on what I told you about false apparitions. And so he tells her, if she appears again, say this: in the name of God, who are you, and what do you wish from me? Very wise, right? And so she does, and Our Lady says, I am the Queen of Heaven, who prays for the conversion of sinners. I wish you to do the same. Gather the children in this world, in this wild country, northern Wisconsin, right? And teach them what they should know for salvation. And she gets 3 of these messages, and the local priest, the local bishop of Green Bay, David Ricken, finally approved these apparitions in 2010. So this woman was dead. And then a shrine was approved, and now there are a pilgrimage, which would account for the fact that this apparition is not widely known. It was only approved by the local bishop in 2010, Our Lady of Good Health. And that takes us to Our Lady of LaVang.
There was a big miracle there. The largest forest fire in the history of this country occurred in 1871 in Wisconsin. And thousands of people died in that fire. And the fire, at this point in time, there was a small shrine to Our Lady.
Mm-hmm.
And people ran to this shrine, okay, when the fire was approaching. And they were praying the rosary. And as the fire approached, they prayed the rosary. And the fire went around to the side, and then they went over to the side and they prayed the rosary there. And the fire swept around them, all around them, everything. The whole area was all scorched, okay, except for the shrine and the property, the shrine property, and where these people were. And they all survived. And, it was like, there were millions of acres of land were destroyed. It was the largest fire ever. It beats anything that occurred in California in the last 10 years. It was a huge fire, but the shrine survived. Everything else destroyed.
That's wonderful. It is very possible that Our Lady's been working through the centuries in many other places that we haven't paid attention to, right?
But also that was a time of real wickedness, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of, people moved out west to make money, mining gold and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they were
This
just
wild country, she
wild
called.
looking to make money,
Mhm.
okay? But there were lots of brothels around.
Yes.
People were not going to church.
That's right.
And Adele Breeze, she ended up becoming a school teacher. And she taught children, and she was teaching them about Jesus and about the church and about
Right.
the church's teaching.
You're reminding me of the research I did early this morning. She, in the very beginning, she's only about 16, she starts going house to house, teaching about Jesus and about salvation to anyone who would listen to her. Eventually, she started a school, and that was successful, and then eventually a group of women formed around her, and they lived by the rule of the Third Order Franciscans, and she continued in that Third Order group until she died and running schools in Wisconsin, Adele Breeze. Thank you, you just reminded me of the rest of the story, yeah. Okay, that takes us, oh my goodness, wait till you hear this one. In 10 minutes, we're going to talk about Our Lady of Akita. Have any of you, Akita is in Japan. Have any of you heard of Our Lady of Akita? Rose Lease knows about her. What do you know about her?
Well, actually, know that she appears to this sister, one of
Yes, a nun, yeah.
the nun, yes, and I really don't remember all the stories, but I've visited the church in Japan.
You have? You've
Yeah.
been to the church, to the shrine?
Yeah.
You have, okay. So this is very recent. This is, did I put up Our Lady, Czestochowa, Loreto, LaVang? No, I didn't put it up. It's 19,
It's on the
It's on the chart.
oh, it's on the chart, there it is. It's 1973 through 79. She gets a whole series of apparitions. There was a young woman named Agnes Katsuko Susagawa, and she had been born with a number of health issues, then and only partial hearing, and then later on she was subjected to a very unsuccessful appendectomy, and so she suffered and she was bedridden for years, and some religious sisters took care of her, and ultimately she moves in with them because she has all these difficulties. In that convent, yes. Akita, Japan, I should tell you, is a very remote area. And in that convent, there was a wooden statue of Mary, which I'll show you in 2 weeks' time when we do the depictions of Mary. Next week we'll do Our Lady and the Rosary. And I hope we have enough people, because we'll break up into groups. By the grace of God, I did this with a very large group in Rhode Island last summer, and it was very fruitful. It was stunning what the testimonies of people, how one prays the rosary. It's different for everybody. It's not the same. What happens in the meditations, it's really wonderful. So I hope many people come next week. But Our Lady of Akita, there is the statue, and she begins to, she gets a mark into her hands, like the stigmata, that first it's a cross, and then it has a little circle in the middle, and eventually that bleeds. And then she begins to see it, and the statue has the stigmata. And then the statue weeps, right? And the statue, over time, a long time, it gives her 3 messages. So there are huge parallels between Our Lady of Akita and her messages and Our Lady of Fatima. And Our Lady of Akita is much later, right? Her first message is, say and pray the handmaids of the Eucharist prayer, and this will cure your deafness. Now, the handmaids of the Eucharist prayer was the name of the order of nuns who took her in. And eventually she does profess with a second order. She moves from that order to a convent to another. But at this point she wasn't a professed nun. Another message is pray the rosary very much. Now, we've heard that in almost every revelation. I alone can save you from the calamities which approach. And then another message, many men in this world afflict the Lord. I desire souls to console him and soften the anger of the Heavenly Father. I wish for souls who will repair by their suffering and their poverty for the sinners and the ingrates in this world. And then the third message is a very long one, which I will have, it's so long I couldn't copy it, but I will read it to you. The third message, well, let me back up and say, all of these messages were relayed to the local bishop, whose name was Bishop Ito, I-T-O, and he approved them. But the third message is so controversial, just like the third Fatima message, that it was brought to Rome to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who at that time was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And it was that doctrine which approves, puts together commissions to study apparitions and make declarations. Most times the declaration is, we are not ready to say that something supernatural happened here to make a formal declaration. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen at all, but the commission has not found enough evidence. Bishop Ito visited and had conversations with Cardinal Ratzinger several times. And now I will read to you the third message, which I find very striking. and which Cardinal Ratzinger determined should not be revealed right away. But then there were interviews in which Cardinal Ratzinger talked about them. So it remains very controversial, this last message. It's hard to find it. Hold on. Also, AT&T's cell power here is only 1 bar. Okay, let's hope, yes, here it is. The third Our Lady of Akita message is, my dear daughter, listen well to what I have to say to you. Well, let me back up and say, in an earlier message, she told her to go to Bishop Ito. He is your superior. So she even directs her what to do. My dear daughter, listen well to what I have to say to you. You will inform your superior, as I told you. If men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the deluge. That's the flood, biblical flood, right? Such as one will never have seen before. Does this remind you of anything? Book of Revelation? Fire will fall from the sky and will wipe out a great part of humanity. The good as well as the bad, sparing neither priest nor faithful. There are apocalypses in 3 of the Gospels where it talks about the sun, the moon, and the stars. Sparing neither priest nor faithful. The survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. That's in the book of Job. The Grateful Dead is in the book of Job. The only arms which will remain for you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. Now the rosary we know. What is the sign left by my son? The cross. That's what came to me. Does anyone think of anything
Do you
else?
think the fire in the sky could be a nuclear war?
I think of the bombs of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, but this was after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah,
Right,
I mean-
right, that's right. So the only arms, meaning weapons, spiritual weapons, which remain for you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. Each day recite the prayer of the rosary. With the rosary, pray for the Pope, the bishops, and the priests. The work of the devil will infiltrate even into the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals and bishops against other bishops.
That's happening
Yes,
already.
we see that.
But it's also true in the past.
It has happened many times in the past. Very good, Peter. The priests who venerate me will be scorned and opposed by their confreres. Churches and altars sacked. Have we seen that?
Well, we've seen in certain countries, or
Certain
Christians are
countries in
persecuted,
the
they bomb
Coptic
the
churches in
churches.
Egypt
Yeah.
have been sacked. There was a French priest recently who was shot right at the Ambo preaching.
And lately, not too long ago in March, this slain one priest while he was doing mass at St. Joseph in Montreal.
Another one, yes, I read about that one as well, yes.
And in Salvador.
El Salvador,
Yeah,
the
Oscar
Bishop
Romero.
Oscar
Yeah.
Romero, right? So churches and altars will be sacked. The church will be full of those who accept compromises, and the demon will press many priests and consecrated souls to leave the service of the Lord. Have we seen nuns and priests leaving?
Yeah.
After Vatican II, there were many. There are some now that are being pushed out, like think of former Cardinal McCarrick. The demon will be especially implacable against souls consecrated to God. The thought of the loss of so many souls is the cause of my sadness. This is the wooden statue that began to cry. Oh, and I didn't tell you, with Our Lady of Akita, it became so famous and people were flocking there that the National Radio of Japan set up cameras and showed the weeping statue not the radio, the television. So, and you can see this online, pictures of her. The thought of the loss of so many souls is the cause of my sadness. If sins increase in number and gravity, there will be no longer pardon for them. With courage, speak to your superior. He will know how to encourage each one of you to pray and to accomplish works of reparation. It is Bishop Ito who directs your community. You have still something to ask, she tells her. Today is the last time that I will speak to you in living voice. From now on, you will obey the one sent to you and your superior. Pray very much the prayers of the rosary. I alone am able still to save you from the calamities which approach. Those who place their confidence in me will be saved. And that's the end of the third message. So this explains, and I read up on it today, this morning, many times Bishop Ito, he approves it, the shrine is built, and he goes to talk to Cardinal Ratzinger several times. There were I think at least 3, maybe more commissions set up to restudy it because miracles begin to happen. And so with subsequent events, they restudy periodically a lot of these. This is known as a private revelation. And and what happened with her is that originally she was deaf in one ear, and then she came to live with the nuns, and during the period of apparitions, at one point her hearing improves, another time she goes totally deaf, and ultimately she got all her hearing back. And later, a woman who had been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, brain tumors, prayed to Our Lady of Akita and was completely healed, and you can read online the testimony of the doctors who say this is inexplicable. So they have 2 miracles from Our Lady of Akita. Any questions on Our Lady of Akita? Very sobering message. So this was not revealed, and I'm not 100% sure of how it's out now. Maybe she revealed it, or I think maybe the Bishop Ito revealed it. But we are in a tremendous period of upheaval in the Catholic Church that goes all the way to the Vatican. I don't know if you've been reading them. The Archbishop Vigano has put out 3 declarations. Cardinal, I'm trying to think of his name, has just within the last few days come out with a declaration. I want to say Van. Is there a Cardinal Van?
Where?
I don't know.
Is it the same with Viganos?
No, it's completely different. This is a man with a lot of standing. Has just put out a warning, and it's long, and I've only had time to read the beginning of it, but there's a new one out. If you Google Cardinal warning, I wish I could remember his name. It is very, very hard for cardinals to speak out without unity with their other cardinals and with the Holy Father. That's a very difficult situation. But little by little, people are beginning to speak. So what are we coming to? Our Lady knows everything now in eternal life. So we do need to pray the rosary. We do need to pray for our Holy Father. We must not be afraid to say that our church is in deep trouble, that the evil one has been prowling around in the Vatican. Oh, you know what came out last week? When Pope Francis was elevated, he chose a man named Teschi, T-E-S-C-H-I. He removed the head of the Vatican Bank, where there were many, many, many scandals about secret accounts, and he put this man in, and he told him it's his job to clean up the Vatican Bank, which has an official name, the Order of Good Works, I think it is. This man recently resigned, and he said that he saw nothing but evil in the Vatican. He's just declared this. Google this man's name. That he and his family were threatened. He saw all kinds of evils within the because there are these secret accounts. And he said, for the safety of his family, I could have looked up to see, as the president of the order for the good works, to find out who the names of the individuals that own the safe. And he said, I did not dare, so I couldn't. So my family would not be threatened, once it would be known that I knew who holds this. So this is dreadful. This is what Our Lady's talking about. This can't happen in the name of God. And the Holy Father asked him to clean up the bank, and now he's gone from the bank. He said he was able to make many, many reforms. And he's speaking out now. That takes great courage.
Couldn't the Holy Father find out who the names are? The account
I'm sure
numbers?
God does, but
The poor guy.
The poor guy.
Yeah.
They have to replace him with somebody who has no family.
Yes. I think of all the wonderful martyrs like Maximilian Kolbe. Our martyrs, who are the seed of all conversion, are people who understood that they had nothing to lose and everything to gain by stepping forward in courage, knowing that they're going to get fed to the lions or they're going to get shot like Archbishop Romero and all of them, because he opposed the power structure in El Salvador, you know, which are 100 families that control both the hierarchy of the church and the military.
And he asked the military to stop shooting the people.
Mhm,
And
he
they
did.
went in the next day and
Yeah.
there was that mass comes, well,
He went on the
post.
radio and spoke to these people who were, by night were guerrillas, by day controlled the government, and he spoke to them directly, and he said, my murderous brothers, he called them.
Yeah.
And
Marianne, this is especially distressing because we get the English version of the L'Osservatore Romano, and there's nothing in there. Nothing about that. A wisp of a hint back when the Pope flew back from Ireland.
Yeah.
A wisp of a hint of something, but nothing since. Nothing of what you've been speaking of.
Yep. And you can well appreciate Joseph Ratzinger reading this message saying, should I
Yeah.
make this public? Right? But what he did say publicly is that the third message to Sister Sasagawa in Akita is the same message of the third message to the children of Fatima. That he said. So that's how much, that's as far as it goes in terms of Vatican approval of this message. So we're way over time, I'm sorry. So next week, come and we will do in one session, we'll look at all of these 4 sets of mysteries, so of the 20 mysteries of the Rosary in terms of how it impacts us and where is Mary as we pray the Rosary in the scenes where she's not present? Where is she? It's a beautiful meditation. Thank you, everybody.